Speaker. My final point is this. At times when Canadians are struggling so much to make ends meet, we all have a responsibility, all members of Parliament, to get together, to work harder, to work longer, to work better on behalf of our constituents. And I hope that this motion will pass unanimously, because Canadians deserve no less than parliamentarians willing to work till midnight every night on their behalf. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member will have 10 minutes to conclude his speech after the time provided for oral questions. Statements by members. The honourable member for Halifax West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise today to do something we have not been able to do for quite some time. Wish Team Canada the greatest success as they compete in the FIFA World Cup. For the first time since 1986, Canada will be sending a team to compete in the most prestigious association football tournament in the world. It's a historic year as Qatar becomes the first Middle Eastern country to host the tournament, welcoming an unexpected 1.7 million fans and transforming Doha into an outdoor exhibition to demonstrate their artwork, shows, and vibrant Arab culture. As a soccer mom myself, this is an exciting moment. Sport is so much more than competition. It's an opportunity to connect with the global community over our shared love of our game. Congratulations to all the players and to lead coach John Herdman for leading the team to this moment. We truly are a football country. On the 23rd, cheer extra loud for Canada.
Member for Carlton Trail.
This past week, I had the pleasure of meeting with representatives from the Prairie Sky, Rosetown, and Humboldt Chambers of Commerce. While our conversations covered a wide range of topics, a common theme was how difficult the past 2.5 years have been for local businesses, especially independent retailers. Lockdowns drove customers to larger retailers and online shopping sites like Amazon. The impact of inflation was top of mind for most, whether they were business owners or municipal representatives. With rising prices, not only is inflation cutting into the bottom line of their customers, it is also increasing costs for businesses, making it difficult for them to survive, let alone thrive. Additionally, one mayor told me that inflation is causing municipal projects to run 25% to 40% over budget, forcing municipalities to make cuts and raise taxes. Small and medium-sized business owners need a conservative government that will put an end to the Prime Minister's...
Le député d'Alfred Pelland.
Monsieur le Président, dépenses d'essence pour la voiture...
Spending money on gasoline for one's car is a big part of most Canadians' budget, but it also generates significant greenhouse gas emissions. That's why we're making it easier and less expensive to buy and charge electric vehicles by helping to expand the network of charging stations across Canada where Canadians live, work, and play. This brings me to last week's inauguration of a new charging station, or of new charging stations, in my riding of Alfred Pelland. Thanks to federal funding for Rechargeco in collaboration with Earth Day Canada and IGA. Charging stations at the Marché de la Concorde will allow residents in Laval to recharge their vehicles while grocery shopping. This will put more Canadians on the path to a carbon-neutral future. That's building a healthier, greener economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable député de Beauport-Limoilou.
Monsieur le Président, la Ville de Québec.
Mr. Speaker, Quebec City is shining on the international stage, not once, twice, but 3 times. Fairmont Chateau Frontenac continues to make us proud by winning the 2022 World Hotel of the Year Award at the 16th World Luxury Hotel Awards. In addition to this award, the Chateau received the World Award in the Luxury Hotel Castle category. And to top it all off, the restaurant Le Champlain was a winner in the Gourmet Restaurant category for the North and Central American region. We're lucky to have this treasure of Quebec's heritage in the heart of our city. So many personalities have gone through this hotel. Charles de Gaulle, Céline Dion, Alfred Hitchcock, Grace of Monaco, Franklin Roosevelt, Churchill, Lindbergh, and Duplessis, and many others. This emblem of tourism, recognized as the most photographed hotel in the world, is part of our history and for the future. The award is the result of the quality of the work and professionalism of the entire staff and management of the hotel. You are the pride of our city, unique in North America. Congratulations.
Honourable Member for Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, in honor of the late Queen Elizabeth II, who served her nation and the Commonwealth for 70 extraordinary years, I hosted the Davenport Platinum Jubilee Leadership Awards last week in my riding. In the spirit of the former Majesty's commitment to service, I wanted to honor the incredible leaders and organizations who are having a profound impact in Davenport communities. Held last week at the MoCA Toronto, 22 awards were given to leaders or organizations who serve and inspire and who rise up to the moment to address and reflect the issues of today. Congratulations to Tracy Jenkins, Claim Paper Theatre, Roseney Theatre, Museum of Contemporary Art Toronto, Teixeira Accounting, Henderson Brewing, Theatre Direct, Pia Bowen Ballet, LA Center for Active Seniors, West Queen West BIA, Oasis Dufferin Community Center, Abrigo Center, Big on Bloor, Do West Fest, Compost Council of Canada, John Keating, Arella Gagnon, Carlos de Souza, Our Place Community of Hope, Inuit Art Foundation, Community Food Centers Canada, Dovercourt Boys and Girls Club, and Mario Cala. Thanks to all the winners for your service and to our community. You are an inspiration to all of us. Merci.
The Honourable Member for York Simcoe.
Mr. Speaker, it's report card time for the Liberals. Let's have a look. Lowering taxes and controlling inflation, fail. Ensuring housing affordability and jobs, fail. Stopping foreign interference and being tough on crime, fail. Fixing our airports and borders, fail. Safeguarding access to children's Tylenol, fail. Providing basic government services, fail. Right across the board, everything feels broken, everyone is worse off, and no one gets ahead. But instead of providing solutions, the Liberals' fall economic statement confirmed. They are out of ideas and out of money. This Liberal government has been in power for 7 years. Ask anybody on the street and they will tell you they were a lot better off 7 years ago than they are today. Most Canadians look around and see what our country has become. The only real change is there's no change left in Canadians' pockets.
The Honourable Member for Ottawa West Nepean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, I attended Rise Up Ottawa, where we heard from students as young as 12 years old about unacceptable acts of hatred just because they are Jewish. Many of them said they are hiding their Jewish identity to avoid being targeted. A brave teacher, Lisa Levitan, coordinated the event to give these youth a voice. Nobody should feel scared to go to school because of their religion. No child should hide who they are in fear of Nazi symbols and rhetoric that should be so anathema in our society that they would be shunned instantaneously. Yet they are not. We need to teach all young people about the Holocaust so that they learn the danger of indifference to oppression. The member for Ottawa Centre and I were among the only non-Jewish participants. We all have an obligation to speak out. To be silent is to cause harm. I ask the House to join me in calling for an end to Jew hatred. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député d'Orléans.
Mr. Speaker, November 14 marks World Diabetes Day. Throughout 2021 to 2023, the theme of World Diabetes Day is access to diabetic cares. For more than 95% of the time, people living with diabetes are looking after themselves. Mais pour s'assurer que les personnes atteintes de diabète ont accès aux ressources médicales,
to ensure that they have access to the resources that they need and better access to high-quality education on diabetes will protect health.
Recognize this year's Kids for a Cure delegation from JDRF that are here meeting with parliamentarians today. And happening tonight from 5 till 8 in the Sir John A. Macdonald, I invite all of you to attend and hear from our youth delegates about their struggle and journey of living with type 1 diabetes. Education, Mr. Speaker, is key to understanding the issues facing people with diabetes. Thank you very much. Merci.
Le député de Louis Saint-Laurent.
Monsieur le Président, en matière d'environnement, ce gouvernement libéral...
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the environment, they talk a lot but don't do much. According to a report made public today in COP27, is that out of 63 countries, Canada is 58th. Instead of taxing everyone, we want to reduce our carbon footprint, where the emissions come from. We don't want to tell businesses what to do, but help them to actually reduce their pollution through research and development. We want to reduce bureaucracy to allow developing our lithium mines and hydroelectricity options. We are the best in the world when it comes to carbon capture, nuclear power, electric power. We need to turn towards green energy instead of sending billions of dollars abroad. This will truly ensure prosperity the world needs more than ever. Canadians know how, and let's be proud of Canada.
L'honorable député de Sackville-Preston, Chesapeake.
Mr. Speaker, as always, both across the country and in my riding of Sackville-Preston, Chesapeake, Canadians turned out in large numbers at a variety of commemoration events to recognize our veterans during Veterans Week. I myself had the opportunity to attend a number of events, both here at home as well as across the country. These included joining the veterans at Camp Hale Veterans Hospital for a moving candlelight tribute to remember the fallen comrades, and the unveiling of the statue of the Highway of Heroes that marked the planting of 2.5 million trees as part of the Tree for Life campaign, as well as several visits to different memorials, legion, and classrooms. It was quite moving to see how many Canadians of all ages and of all walks of life took the time to show our veterans how grateful they are for keeping us safe and free. Let's continue taking the opportunities to value and recognize the amazing contribution and sacrifices of our veterans all year round. Lest we forget, nous nous souviendrons. Thank you.
The honourable member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
I just met with Melody and Jack Horton and their two boys, Lucas and Jesse. They had the same hope as all young families to own a home. This was out of reach for them in Ontario, so they left and bought their dream home on a lake in Nova Scotia. They quickly found jobs, and the family loved swimming in the lake in the summer and skating on it in the winter. Life was everything they hoped it would be, until this year. The rapid cost increases for gas to heat their home and for food for the family was too much. Melody and Jack sold their dream house in September. They moved into a house half the size, and they are still struggling to pay the bills. The Hortons don't understand why these Liberals don't know how tough it is for families. The new Conservative leader will always put people first. He will always work every single day to make paychecks bigger and government smaller for families like the Hortons.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Recent reports that Beijing interfered in our democracy are deeply troubling. It's clear Beijing spread disinformation through proxies in the last 2021 election campaign. It's also clear in recently unsealed indictments in U.S. court that Beijing's agents are operating freely here on Canadian soil, coercing members of the Chinese community. Recent reports have also revealed the presence of 3 illegal People's Republic of China police stations operating in the Toronto region. And now we find out that Beijing illegally funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars to at least 11 election candidates in the 2019 general election. Despite the government knowing about this for at least 10 months, no one has been expelled, no one has been criminally charged, and no action has been taken. The biggest victims of this interference is the Chinese community itself. When is this government going to take action to protect Canadians and protect Canadian democracy?
Here, here. The honourable member for Hamilton Mountain.
Speaker, cancer care deserves priority health care funding. Hamilton has a world-class network of healthcare providers, including the Juravinsky Cancer Centre in my riding of Hamilton Mountain, where nearly 5,000 healthcare workers live. I hear regularly from constituents who provide care and from many who receive cancer care. Recently, I met Melody. During the pandemic, she waited far far too long for a biopsy on a lump on her thyroid. She traveled from Sudbury to Hamilton and had to return home again when her procedure was canceled due to backlogs. Melody says she's grateful our government's targeted investments will help provinces and territories remedy these problems. Cancer is still the leading cause of death for Canadians, and last week a report from Canadian Cancer Society showed us cancer cases are on the rise. We need more investment and to make cancer care a priority at every level of government. I want to thank the Canadian Cancer Society for encouraging us to make cancer care even better.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
According to the UN, to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, global emissions have to drop 7.6% every year. To save our planet, Canada must reduce its emissions by 60% by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. Addressing oil and gas emissions is critical if Canada is to reach its share of that target. Instead of subsidizing the oil and gas industry, who, by the way, made $147 billion in profits this year alone, Canada should be reinvesting in the green tech sector and supporting communities in building climate resilience. Canada also needs just transition legislation, a clean jobs secretariat, and training center for workers. The adoption of a clean jobs industrial strategy that echoes the calls from CANRAC, EcoJustice, CLC, Unifor, and Blue Green Canada is a must. Interprovincial electricity grid connection, massive transit expansion, and the acceleration of retrofits with a big focus on energy poverty and low and medium income households must be prioritized. We have no time to waste.
L'honorable député de Berthier-Masquinongé.
Monsieur le Président, il me fait plaisir.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to highlight today Lavaltrie's 350th anniversary. It's a beautiful municipality in Berthier-Masquinongé. Lavaltrie owes its name to Séraphin Margan, sire of Lavaltrie and lieutenant in the Carignan-Salière regiment, to whom Intendant Talon granted a seigneury in 1672. A magnificent church was built according to the plans of architect Victor Bourgeot, a native of the town. A sculpture of him by artist Claude Desrosiers was recently unveiled on the church grounds. As the author Honoré Beaugrand made Lavaltrie the center of a story, the city is also closely linked to the legend of La Chasse-Galerie. To conclude, I would like to thank the Historical Society and its volunteers, and I invite you to take a historical tour completing the traditional rally held for many years by the city, in which I had the great privilege of participating.
Laval-Trois et Laval-Trois.
Happy birthday to the people of Laval.
Member for South Surrey White Rock.
The NDP and Liberal Party have launched an attack on parliamentary committees. Today, they brought a motion to strip committees of their already scarce resources. This means cancelled meetings and interrupting important investigations. The Government Operations Committee is digging into the $54 million ArriveCan app, including the false reports that contractors were paid millions but didn't receive a dime. Where is the money and who got rich? The Heritage Committee is investigating the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion for providing funding to known racist and anti-Semite Laith Marouf. The Procedure and House Affairs Committee has an investigation into foreign interference in our elections. The Prime Minister knew since January and has failed to act. This important work of all House committees will be restricted by today's motion. Conservatives continue to fight against just inflation and higher taxes. The government needs more accountability, not less. This motion shields the Liberals from criticism, and Conservatives won't stand for it.
The Honourable Member for Parkdale High Park.
Mr. Speaker, in August of 1972, President Idi Amin ordered everyone of South Asian descent out of Uganda. Given 90 days to leave or face military internment, thousands suddenly became stateless, triggering an international call to accept these refugees. Canada answered that call. This was a huge step. To that point, this country had never attempted to resettle a group of non-white, non-Christian people from outside of Europe. Among the 8,000 people that would settle here were me, my sister, and my parents. A family like so many others that came here seeking one thing, Mr. Speaker: safety. But what we found was so much more. A cold climate, yes, Mr. Speaker, but a warm and welcoming people who helped us settle and helped us integrate. Ugandan Asian refugees have emerged as leaders in business, the professions, even as parliamentarians, Mr. Speaker, but all have made a point of giving back. On this 50th anniversary, I can only say thank you to my mother and father for having the courage to cross the planet and start over, and to this country, Canada, for giving my family and all Ugandan Asians not just safety, but opportunity.
Questions, question orale, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, Canadian kids are suffering without medication. The president of a pharmaceutical company that that distributes to 19 countries, he reports that only Canada is lacking essential drugs. Canadians have to go to the U.S. even to buy some of these medications, which are abundant south of the border. But here in Canada, we don't have any. Why are kids in other countries getting these drugs when ours aren't? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank my colleague for asking this question, which talks about the stress on Canadian families and kids. So there's been some good news. The supply has increased, and just a few years ago, we announced a signed deal with a company to provide Canadians several months' worth of additional supply in children's analgesics. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
And a quote from the Wall Street Journal, which had an article about Canada's children's medication shortage. Mark Parrish, president of the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Wholesalers, a trade association with members in 19 countries, says that no other country is experiencing similar shortages as Canada is. That forces our parents to drive south of the border and buy the medications in the United States where they are abundant and in supply, and bring them back here. Many people are actually hawking them with a profit back in this country. Again, why are these medications available abroad but not here at home?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to repeat the answer in English this time. The question is right. No, the stress that families and children are going through is real. That's why we were pleased with collaboration with other producers and retailers, partners over the last few weeks to see an increase, a substantial increase in the production, home production of analgesics for children. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, just a few hours ago, we announced an important importation of a few months additional supply of analgesics for children, which will make a big difference in the ability of children to be cared in Canada.
Leader of the Opposition.
The Governor of the Bank of Canada has said that inflation here is domestically generated, not imported from the rest of the world. He agrees with our friend and the future leader of the Liberal Party, Mark Carney, who says that inflation is coming from Canada. But interestingly, the Governor says that the solution is to cap wages and cut jobs. He says the only way to stop inflation is to drive up unemployment. Does the government agree that it needs to kill jobs to fight the inflation that this government has caused?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what our government believes in is an economic approach which is both compassionate and fiscally responsible. In fact, here is what the Globe and Mail, which as a rule doesn't agree with our government's policies, had to say about the fall economic statement. And I quote, "It is, broadly speaking, the right approach. Canada has the slimmest government shortfall in the G7. In inflation-fighting terms, that has Liberal fiscal policy looking pretty good, especially graded on a curve."
Hear, hear.
Leader of the Opposition.
Well, what's not looking pretty good is the cost of diesel. In New Brunswick, it's over $3 a litre. Diesel is not a luxury, it's a necessity when you live in the country and drive a big truck. It's a necessity for the truckers that bring us our goods to our grocery stores. No wonder we have 11% food price inflation. And home heating bills are not looking any better. They're going to double this winter. And families in oil-heated communities will have to spend thousands of dollars. Cutting their subscription to Disney will save them $13. That's not enough to pay the bill. But what would help is if they canceled the plan to triple the tax. Will they?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every single member of Parliament who sits in this House is privileged. We all earn good salaries, and we have hard-working staffers who support us well. I absolutely recognize how privileged my family and I are. And that's why in the Fall Economic Statement, tabled earlier this month, we focused our government's finite resources on helping the Canadians who need it the most. We did that by doubling the GST credit, providing a $500 top-up to Canadians struggling to pay their rent, and providing dental care for Canadian kids.
Leader of the Opposition.
Well, if she really wanted to empathize with the low-income people who are struggling, then she and her NDP coalition partners would cancel their plan to triple the carbon tax. They want to do it at a time when home heating bills are expected to double, costing thousands of dollars for families in oil-heated communities, when diesel prices are over $3 a litre. Mr. Speaker, Canadians cannot afford it, nor can they afford to spend $6,000 on the Prime Minister's hotel rooms, nor do they need lectures about cancelling Disney Plus. Will they cancel the carbon tax instead?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
I come from a region of the country that's recently seen the most severe weather event over the course of my entire life. But what really upsets me is that we know there is more to come. We know since the time I was born until the turn of the century, the average insured losses in this country were between $250 and $450 million a year for severe weather. Now it's almost $2 billion annually. A few years...
I want everybody to pay attention to their whips, please. Thank you. The Honourable Minister for Immigration, from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, I have a better solution than people listening to their whips. Turn the microphones on in the background so you can hear members on that side denying climate change is a real threat to Canadian communities. Mr. Speaker, the reality is the cost of inaction is too great to ignore. We are dealing with hundreds of millions, probably billions of dollars of losses that have torn down silos, destroyed wharves, and caused untold damage to property. In my community, the plan to put a price on pollution is actually going to give more money back to families who live in our communities. If the opposition, for the third time in a row, wants to campaign on a commitment to take money from families, they can triple down on a strategy that's going to keep them in opposition for...
L'honorable député de la Prairie.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, it sounds like healthcare funding is futile. Futile, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Health said that. It's futile, in his opinion, to ask the federal government to increase health transfers because it seems Quebec and the provinces are rolling in money. We have so much money and things are going so well in the hospitals that it's futile to ask the federal government to finally do their fair share. Did the minister talk to Quebec emergency physicians about their futile situation? Did he go and tell the nurses working mandatory overtime that adequate funding for health care was futile? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for talking about what would be a useful battle, and that would be a battle to help healthcare workers who are overworked and ill. They need our support. They are going through a difficult situation with illnesses and patients who have had their diagnoses and their surgeries postponed. Let's talk about what is useful rather than what's futile. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. That's a futile answer. Mr. Speaker, these pontificators can't even print passports or manage borders or process immigration applications. What's more, La Presse reported on Saturday that they can't even get seniors their old age pension checks. You can't make this stuff up. 70,000 new retirees last year alone had to wait months for their pensions. Who would want these pontificators to decide anything about health care for seniors when they can't even cut them a check? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. It's an interesting question, Mr. Speaker, from the Bloc, because they just had a convention a couple of days ago, and the big conclusion of the Bloc's convention was to use all fora to convince Quebecers of their idea of forming their own country. And when the Bloc says that they're for Quebecers, it would be nice if for once they really were. The Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby. All across the country, there are more and more kids in emergency rooms. Everywhere, hospitals are running out of beds for them, and winter isn't even here yet. Parents worry that if their kids get sick, they might be denied care. Instead of bickering, when are the Liberals going to take this situation seriously and do something to protect our kids? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, we're very grateful for that question. The first thing is that our children and seniors and families are going through tough times. There are viruses cutting through the population at an alarming pace. We're not done with COVID yet. The hospitals are still dealing with COVID and RSV and flu. It's going to be a bad year for those things. So we do have a responsibility and a duty to take care of one another, and that requires mass vaccination and other public health measures.
They want to know their kids will be taken care of when they get sick. Across Canada, there is a children's Tylenol and Advil shortage, and now hospitals are dealing with a lack of pediatric antibiotics. Mr. Speaker, it's a scary time to be a parent, and there are things this government can do now. Instead of vague promises and pointing fingers, the Liberals must ensure our kids get the medicine they need. Parents are desperate for help. Where is the plan to care for our children?
The Honourable Minister for Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Families and children are indeed living through stressful times today, and that's why we were pleased to announce just a few hours ago that there will be a special importation of additional analgesics, the equivalent of several months of normal supply, in addition to the increased domestic production of these analgesics, so that children and their families can have access to those drugs in the very short time, and therefore we'll keep working on a longer-term solution to these shortages. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Temperatures are dropping across Canada, and Canadians are needing to heat their homes. Home heating prices are doubling this winter, and Liberals will add to the pain by increasing the carbon tax. The Finance Minister's advice to families, though, cancel their Disney Plus. $14.99 a month won't do anything for the 1 in 5 Canadians skipping meals. This minister is out of touch, and Canadians are out of money. Why won't the Liberals give Canadians actual relief and cancel their plans to triple taxes on gas, home heating, and groceries?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, why don't we talk about some really terrible advice that was offered to Canadians in the spring by the Conservative leader? He urged Canadians to invest in crypto as a way to opt out of inflation. Now, Bitcoin has crashed by 21% over the past week, and by more than 65% since the Conservative leader first gave Canadians that reckless advice. The Conservatives should apologize today for this reckless policy and admit that investing in crypto would have bankrupted Canadians.
Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
A delusional response from the Minister of Netflix. Maybe instead of advising Canadians to cancel their $14.99 a month Disney Plus subscriptions, the minister can do the right thing and cancel their government greed instead. The government told us the whole point of the carbon tax was to lower emissions. They spent over $100 billion since 2015 on the environment. And despite what the Prime Minister says, emissions are up and Canadians are out of money. Why won't the Liberals give Canadians some relief and cancel their inflation tax?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
You know, Mr. Speaker, what should be cancelled is the reckless advice that the Conservatives offered to Canadians and for which they have never apologized, which was to invest in crypto. If a Canadian had invested $10,000 in crypto when the Conservative leader told them that was a good idea, today they would have less than $3,500.
Wow.
If they had invested in a crypto exchange platform, they would be totally wiped out. What should happen, Mr. Speaker, is that the Conservatives should apologize and withdraw that reckless advice.
Honourable member for Thornhill.
The private jets have landed and the limousines are idling in Egypt for a UN climate change conference where the minister is claiming to save the planet. Meanwhile, in Canada, struggling Canadians are paying record high prices for their costly plan that hasn't even reduced emissions. Private jets and limousines for these Liberals and higher prices on gas, groceries and home heating for Canadians. When will they admit their plan isn't working, park the jets, and scrap the carbon tax they plan to triple?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member knows that 8 out of 10 families will be better off under our price on pollution and the climate action incentive. And Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Opposition never talks about the costs of climate change. There are many members from British Columbia on the other side. Mr. Speaker, a $9 billion impact from the floods, fires and droughts experienced last year. 600 people died under the heat dome, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have a moral imperative and an economic imperative to do something about climate change. The honourable members of the opposition have no plan, never did, never will.
The honourable member for Thornhill.
That's misinformation from the member opposite. 1.5 million Canadians used food banks in 1 month. The response from the finance minister was to tell struggling Canadians that she was cutting her Disney Plus subscription. $14 a month is not going to put food on the table. It's insulting. Canadians are out of money. This government's out of touch. When will they stop their out of control spending and stop raising taxes on Canadians?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me tell you what really is out of touch. It is an economic plan which would eviscerate the EI system, which would endanger seniors' pensions, which would make pollution free again, which would claw back climate checks from Canadian families, which would leave Canadian children without dental care and deprive low-income renters of the support they urgently need. Our plan is responsible and compassionate. The Conservatives' approach is neither.
Hear, hear.
L'honorable.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, my constituents see a tax for a tax, and when this government wastes money on their cronies like Frank Baylis or for a useless app like ArriveCan, that's called a scandal. And when they increase the carbon tax on gas, groceries, and everything else, they're making families struggle. When is this government going to show some compassion and scrap their plan to triple the carbon tax? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, our plan is caring, and it's also responsible. In the economic update, we mentioned that Canada's AAA rating has been reinforced. Canada has an excellent report on employment. 108,000 new jobs were created in October. Canada has now recovered 116% of the jobs lost during the pandemic. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable, a father of 6, said he can no longer adequately feed his family. The finance minister's solution is that family should decide between Disney Plus and Netflix. That parent should decide between ground beef and bologna. That's this minister's economic vision. The NDP Liberal plan hits the poorest people the hardest. Why will they not give up on these tax hikes? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, what my honourable colleague has said is totally false. This is the government that has supported Canadian families with increased benefits. The father of 6 will receive thousands of dollars to feed his children. The Conservative solution would be to cut. What would they cut? We don't know, but it's something that they would immediately do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Jonquière. I need my mic. Oh, okay. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health insulted Quebec and the provinces by saying that their call for increased health transfers was futile. Wow, that says a lot. Quebec spends 40% of its budget on health. That's not futile, 40% of the budget. Above all, it's not futile when, even with 40% of the budget, our network is exhausted and out of resources because his government isn't pulling its weight. When will the minister finally realize the only thing that's futile is his battle to deny funding for our hospitals? The Honourable Health Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased that the member is talking about spending. Spending is what we've been doing for years. With the COVID pandemic, we spent $72 billion, and we will keep up the funding because, unfortunately, COVID is still around, and we've provided funding for surgeries, for diagnosis, for mental health, for home care. And I know I don't have long, but if the member wants to ask another question about funding, that would be useful. The honourable member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, all they need to do is increase health transfers to 35%. At the meeting on health transfers, the minister said, my job isn't to send money to the ministers of finance. My job is to make sure I help my fellow ministers of health do their difficult work. Well, that's right, Mr. Speaker. All his fellow ministers of health have made it clear that the way to help them do their hard work is to send them money. If the Minister of Health can't help them by sending money, why doesn't he send the finance minister instead of wasting their time? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate the member on another excellent question. My responsibility as Health Minister is not to just send money without conditions. I like the other finance ministers, but I deal with the health ministers. So I'm even if I send money to the finance ministers, that might please them, but it won't help with health care. So my concern is to make sure that the health ministers can do their job together. The honourable member for Jonquière. You know, Mr. Speaker, the health minister's fight against health care funding comes at a price. It's not just patients who pay, it's all Quebecers. Quebec spends 40% of its budget on health care, and even that's not enough anymore because the costs keep going up and quickly. All this is money that's not going into overcrowded classrooms or social services for the less fortunate or new child care spaces. Mr. Speaker, there is a huge hole in Quebec's social safety net. Does the minister realize he's the one causing it? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to congratulate the member because he's focusing more and more on results and what really needs to be done, reducing delays for diagnoses and surgery, increasing funding for rural health care, increasing funding for health, mental health care, for long-term care, for home care, and supporting healthcare workers who need so much support. They need us to help them to take care of themselves as well as others.
Colchester.
Mr. Speaker, last week we heard this Liberal government has been strong-arming the government of Nova Scotia to prevent them from reducing provincial fuel taxes. With the cost of living at an all-time high, Canadians could use any help. But thanks to this Liberal government, absolutely none is forthcoming. Why is the minister pulling out all the stops in a concerted effort to hurt Canadians more and more by tripling the carbon tax?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's beyond disappointing to hear from the Honourable Member a week many weeks after Hurricane Fiona, the honourable member wants to take an important measure off the table that will help reduce pollution, but also put more money in people's pockets. And, Mr. Speaker, we are there with $300 million to help Atlantic Canadians rebuild, Mr. Speaker. We are there with $120 million to help them transition to cleaner forms of energy, Mr. Speaker. We will be there for Atlantic Canadians, Mr. Speaker, ever and always.
The honourable member for Cumberland Colchester.
Speaker, let's be clear. The majority of Atlantic Canadians still have not seen a penny for the cleanup of Fiona, and the mess is still there. I also want to quote further, Mr. Speaker. Provinces and territories must not implement measures that directly offset, reduce, or negate the price signals sent by the carbon price. They want Canadians to pay more at the pumps. And shame on any provincial minister of finance who would dare to try and reduce the tax. This is an attitude that we're dealing with, Mr. Speaker. Why does the Liberal government refuse to allow provincial governments to reduce taxes on gas and groceries and home heatings, Mr. Speaker? The essentials.
The Honourable Minister for Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, with great respect to my honourable friend, colleague and neighbour in Nova Scotia, I'd point out to him that governments from Newfoundland to Ontario of different partisan persuasion have done exactly what he has just declared not possible. The facts tell a very different story. But what's most important, Mr. Speaker, is we actually address climate change. The cost to my community, talk to any dairy farmer and find one who's lost less than $100,000 in crops. I bet you can't. I've spent time on the ground to actually talk to them about what their losses are. I've viewed my neighbors' fences be turned into splinters, and I continue to want to support our community by putting more money in their pockets by making sure this price will do the right thing.
Member for King Vaughan.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's seniors are struggling to survive. Denise, a senior living in Halifax, Nova Scotia, has been employed since she was 16 years old. Denise's income includes a job, old age security, and her Canada pension. Yet, Denise is forced to live in her car as she is unable to afford housing. When will this Liberal government show some compassion and give our seniors some relief and cancel their plans to triple the taxes on gas, groceries, and home heating?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, for Denise's sake, I really hope she didn't follow the Conservative leader's advice and invest in crypto as a way to avoid inflation. If she had done that, at best, she would have lost 65% of her savings. She may well have been entirely wiped out had she listened to the Conservatives and invested in a crypto platform. Mr. Speaker, it is time for the Conservative leader to take responsibility for this reckless advice and to apologize.
The Honourable Member for Elmwood Transcona.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last year, Canadian family wages rose less than half as fast as inflation. And yet the Liberals recently had the gall to say that higher wage pressures are causing inflation. All while major grocery chains made huge profits and paid millions of dollars in compensation to their shareholders and CEOs. Just like the Conservative leader, the Deputy Prime Minister refuses to acknowledge the full extent to which corporate greed and profit-seeking is driving inflationary pressure on Canadian household budgets. So my question is simple. When are the Liberals going to stop blaming workers and tackle the real causes of inflation by forcing CEOs and their corporations to pay their fair share?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government is absolutely committed to ensuring everyone in Canada pays their fair share. Let me give you just a few examples. We have permanently raised corporate income tax by 1.5% on Canada's largest and most profitable banks and insurance companies. We have introduced a Canada Recovery Dividend of 15% on banks and insurance companies to help pay for the cost of fighting COVID. And, Mr. Speaker, we have now introduced a luxury tax on planes and cars and yachts. Planes and cars worth over 100,000, yachts worth over 250,000, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Vancouver East.
Canada has put thousands of refugee claimants and migrants in immigration detention in provincial jails, even though they have not committed any crimes. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International are calling on the Prime Minister to end this abusive practice. BC, Nova Scotia, Alberta, and Manitoba have proactively canceled their immigration detention contracts with CBSA. But this shouldn't just be on provinces. Refugees and migrants are not criminals. Will the Liberals put an end to this odious immigration detention practice and stop putting migrants and asylum seekers in provincial jails?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, Canada has a robust and fair refugee system, and immigration detention is a measure of last resort. While we've made significant progress, there's more work to do. We thank the Honourable Lloyd Axworthy and Honourable Alan Rock, as well as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International for their efforts on this issue, and I look forward to continuing to work with them on this important issue.
The Honourable Member for Etobicoke Centre.
The Ukrainian people have been fighting bravely against Russia's brutal and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine, and they've been making incredible progress, retaking territory, while also defending the values that we all share of peace, democracy, and human rights. Mr. Speaker, Canada's military aid has been integral to Ukraine's counteroffensive. As NATO Secretary General has said on many occasions, Canada is a leader in supporting Ukraine. And today, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister of Canada made an announcement of additional military support for the people of Ukraine. Could the Minister of National Defence please share with this House and with Canadians about this announcement?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member from Etobicoke Centre for this question. This morning, the Prime Minister announced an additional $500 million of military aid, bringing the total committed by the Government of Canada to over $1 billion.
Bravo. Bravo.
In addition, Mr. Speaker, Canada is transporting military aid on behalf of our allies and ourselves. We've transported over 5 million pounds of aid. We stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine in the short and the long term.
Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear Beijing interfered in last year's 2021 election. Beijing's ambassador to Canada commented critically and publicly during that election campaign, and Beijing spread disinformation through proxies on Chinese language social media platforms. And last week, we find out that Beijing also interfered in the 2019 election. We find out that the Prime Minister was told 10 months ago in January about hundreds of thousands of dollars that were illegally funneled to at least 11 election candidates. My question is simple. Who are these 11 election candidates?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, it's good to see the Conservatives actually taking foreign interference seriously for once. We saw in the last Parliament how Conservative members didn't care about protecting our national security. They removed their members from NSICOP that would provide the information that the member opposite is looking for. The member from Durham, when he was leader, he took his toys and went home, took Conservative members off that committee, which actually provides the very information the member opposite is looking for. We have taken our democratic institutions seriously and implemented many measures to ensure that foreign interference.
Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, that is an appalling answer. It's this government that allowed People's Liberation Army scientists of the People's Republic of China into a top-level lab in this country against the government's own security protocols and in threat to the Five Eyes Alliance. We're talking about payments of hundreds of thousands of dollars to election candidates. We're talking about Beijing putting agents in MPs' offices. We're talking about an increasingly aggressive campaign to silence Canadian MPs. My question again to the government is very simple. Who are these 11 candidates?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, the risk of foreign interference is something we've taken seriously since forming government. That's actually precisely why we put in place a panel, a non-partisan panel, to assess any sort of foreign actors' interference to determine if it's credible threats that the public should be aware of. All parties were briefed and provided information about foreign interference, something the Conservatives never bothered to do previously. Mr. Speaker, putting in place a nonpartisan panel during elections will ensure that our democratic institutions are protected.
The honourable member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service informed the Prime Minister that the Chinese Communist regime influenced the Canadian federal elections in 2019 and 2021. This illegal influence included the clandestine financing of a network of at least 11 candidates and that no one was criminally charged. The Prime Minister boasted to the media that his government has taken significant steps to combat this threat, but his significant steps appear to be stealth in nature because no one has seen them. We're talking about 11 candidates. What is he going to do to protect Canadian democracy?
Mr. Speaker, any foreign interference poses a threat to the very fabric of our democracy, and we will never tolerate it. The RCMP and intelligence agencies are aware of these threats and are investigating. In addition, all actions are on the table, Mr. Speaker, including legislation, and I hope the honourable members across the way will support the cybersecurity legislation before this House. Canadians demand that we take action, and we always will.
The honourable member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious threat. Today, for the first time in Canadian history, we have criminal charges against a Hydro-Quebec employee that is accused of being a Chinese spy. And now CSIS has said the peril Canada faces if it chooses not to act on allegations of Chinese foreign interference is very significant. Canada's former ambassador to China, David Mulroney, said he did not think the government understood this or was inclined to act. Simple question, Mr. Speaker. We want to know who were the 11 candidates that benefited from the Chinese communist funding. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for raising a very important question. There's nothing more serious for all parliamentarians than national security. My colleague was asking what steps we took. I'd like to inform him that recently we already strengthened the rules with respect to critical minerals across the country, and recently I named 3 transactions to protect national security in this country. On this side of the House, I think that we take national security very seriously, and we've always acted in the interests of Canadians. The honourable member for Avignon, La Matisse, Matin, Matapedia. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister was absent from Canada's delegation to COP27 in Egypt on climate change. But do you know who was at the delegation in his place? The oil sands industry. You can't make this stuff up, Mr. Speaker. Canada sent 6 oil companies, a pipeline manufacturer, and a most royally oil-rich bank to a meeting on climate change instead of the Prime Minister. And of course, not surprisingly, all of the environmental groups asked for their expulsion from the Canadian pavilion. Can the government confirm that it has already put them on a plane? And if not, what is he waiting for?
Secretary.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, we have to work with everyone to achieve a fair transition to a cleaner economy. The fact that every sector has a role to play to reduce pollution and reach net zero, particularly the oil sector. And this means that our government did not hesitate to say that the oil sector has to do more. The honourable member for Avignon, La Matisse, Matin, Matapedia. Mr. Speaker, Canada has exactly the same strategy at COP as Saudi Arabia. Both showed up saying they would continue to increase their oil production. Both invited the oil industry to discuss how their oil is greener than green through capture and storage. Both used the COP forum to promote their oil and gas sales by touting their green credentials. And finally, did the government want the world to realize that Canada is also, like Saudi Arabia, an oil monarchy? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I think the honourable member would agree we need to work with everyone to achieve a just transition to a clean economy. Every sector has a role to play in cutting pollution, especially the oil and gas sector. We know the oil and gas sector must do more, Mr. Speaker. That's why we are eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. That's why we are capping emissions, Mr. Speaker. And in these times of record profits, Mr. Speaker, the oil and gas sector needs to put their shoulder to the wheel, invest in pollution prevention, and to build the clean economy of tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Speaker, with our new leader, Conservatives have a plan to curtail 40-year high inflation that's crippling Canadians. And it's very simple, really. Curb reckless spending and stop tax increases. But as long as this government's in power, the reckless spending continues. After all, the Liberal motto is, don't just stand there, spend something. Tax increases, however, can be stopped. Why won't the Liberals give Canadians a break and finally stop their plans to triple their tax increases on groceries, gas, and home heating?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
The Conservative leader did have a very specific plan, which he recommended to Canadians on how to opt out of inflation. And that was invest in crypto. Now, if Canadians had followed that advice, at a minimum, they would have lost 65% of what they invested. Many of them, had they chosen to invest in crypto platforms, would be totally wiped out. So that, Mr. Speaker, is the Conservative inflation fighting plan. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I prefer our compassionate response.
Honourable member for Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Speaker, I would bet you 15 Disney Pluses that Canadians are more concerned about tax increases on their bills right now, Mr. Speaker. And it just gives us the new motto that Liberals have. Don't just stand there, tax something. This spend and tax Liberal government is taxing Canadians at a time when they need relief the most. Conservatives say, stop the spending, stop the tax increases. Why won't this government do the bare minimum and cancel the triple tax increases to groceries, gas, and home heating?
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that our approach is compassionate. It's about doubling the GST credit. It's about giving kids under 12 dental care. It's about helping people struggling to pay their rent. But you know what else, Mr. Speaker? It is fiscally responsible. The day we tabled the fall economic statement, Moody's reaffirmed Canada's AAA rating with a stable outlook. And the day afterwards, Canada had a blockbusting jobs report. 108,000 jobs created in October alone. We've recovered 117% of the jobs lost to COVID.
The honourable member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, and Headingley.
Mr. Speaker, while Canadians are struggling with the cost of everything, the Prime Minister is busy spending $6,000 a night on hotel rooms. He would rather leave Canadians to freeze in the dead of winter than help them keep the heat on by removing the carbon tax from their heating bills. Well, you can bet Conservatives will keep the heat on these Liberals until they do just that. Why won't the Liberals finally give Canadians a break and cancel their plan to triple taxes on gas, groceries, and home heating?
The Honourable Minister for Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, if that member was concerned about the government standing by Canadians in their time of need, I'm curious why he stood by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition at the beginning of the pandemic when we rolled out supports to keep food on the table and roof over people's heads, where he said, we're Conservatives, we don't believe in big fat government programs. Now he's concerned about us making sure that we're properly funded the Canada Pension Plan and EI. That money is there so people can have dignity in retirement and make sure that when they fall on tough times, they are supported. People have earned those benefits through their own earnings over the course of their careers, where they have busted joints and broken limbs, working day after day after day. The least they deserve is to be supported, and we're going to be here for them.
The honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Mr. Speaker, the Government of Canada announced on November 3rd its fall 2022 economic statement. This update outlines the government's plan to continue to reduce the cost of living for Canadians and build a country where no one is left behind. With people asking for help Can the Minister of Economic Development for the regions of Quebec explain how the new measures will have a positive impact on the lives of Canadians? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for her excellent work and for her question. The government is listening to Canadians and is working tirelessly to support them. For example, as of November 4th, approximately 11 million low-income earners who currently receive a GST tax payment will receive a supplement. It's also introducing the Canada Dental Benefit, which will support families in need, as well as the Canada Housing Allowance Supplement and many other concrete measures. The government is listening to the middle class who are asking for action, and we will always do everything to support them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Peterborough Kawartha.
Christmas is just over a month away, and while most Canadians should be wishing and shopping for presents, they're not. They're wishing that they can afford to pay their bills. They're wishing that they won't have to rely on a food bank to feed their family. Mr. Speaker, this is Canada, and we can do so much better. People are struggling to feed their families. I ask the Liberals today, will they cancel their planned tax hikes on home heating, gas, and groceries?
The Minister for Families.
On this side of the House, for the past 7 years, we have demonstrated compassion and responsibility. We have been there for Canadians and Canadian families, whether it's through the Canada Child Benefit, whether it's through childcare, whether it's through Canada the Dental Plan or housing. What we have not done, Mr. Speaker, is provide completely irresponsible financial advice that would leave Canadian families devastated. If that member and those members opposite care, I hope they apologize to Canadians for the reckless advice their leader offered in terms of investing in crypto, because they would have seen their savings completely eviscerated. That is disappointing, and they should apologize. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That's right. The Honourable Member for Peterborough Kawartha.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals need to apologize for Canadians because they have the highest use of food banks in history. 1 in 3 of those are Canadian. We have fallen from 10th to 30th place in child well-being. That you should be ashamed of. That is disgusting. So I will ask again, Mr. Speaker, when Canadians have to heat their home and spend $7,000, this isn't a luxury, this is a necessity. Will they do the right, responsible, and leadership thing? Just show compassion. Acknowledge the crisis that we are in. I know they must be receiving the same emails. Cancel the planned tax hikes.
Yeah. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, 2 million Canadians, including 450,000 children, less in poverty under this government than when the Conservatives were in power, Mr. Speaker. When they had the opportunity to actually vote on measures that would help Canadian families, like the Canada Dental Benefit, like the Canadian Housing Benefit, like childcare for families from coast to coast to coast, or perhaps, Mr. Speaker, we can talk about the Canada Workers Benefit. Mr. Speaker, these are all things that the Conservatives voted against. They talk a good game, but when it comes to actually supporting Canadians, they're nowhere to be found.
Hear, hear. That's right.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, before us, unfortunately, stands a government that spends without limit and without counting. In the press, we learned that the government bought twice as many medical ventilators as needed for the health of Canadians. That's $403 million for nothing. What's more, the government can't even find a way to sell them or give them back. What's wrong with this situation, Mr. Speaker? Are there any real managers in the government to ring the bell of Liberal incompetence? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would say that competency and responsibility of a government is to ensure the health and safety of its citizens. That's the first responsibility of any government, particularly in a period of crisis. Like we saw in the beginning of 2020, we invested where we had to because we knew that people were going through tough times, and we had to protect their ability to pay the necessary services and also protect their health in case they fell ill with COVID.
Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, one of Canada's great advantages as a country is our capable workforce and the strong economic relationships we have with the United States. When the U.S. passed the Inflation Reduction Act, we saw that Canada was successful in lobbying for a Buy North America policy that protected our automotive sector. Can the Deputy Prime Minister tell this House about how the Fall Economic Statement represents the next steps in Canada's plan to seize economic opportunities of net zero transition and maintain Canada's competitive advantage with the United States?
Well, Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the honourable member for his question and for the work he does for his constituents every day, which I have seen firsthand. Very impressive. Mr. Speaker, in the Fall Economic Statement, we introduced tax credits to encourage investment in clean technology and clean hydrogen. We advanced the Canada Growth Fund to attract private capital to fund the green transition, and we invested in Canada's most valuable asset, our people, by moving the Canada Workers' Benefit to an advance payment. 4.2 million Canadians will get this important top-up. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Courtney Alberni.
Speaker, the Liberals said they would ensure mental health care be treated as a full and equal part of Canada's universal public health care system. They promised to fund mental health supports, but that funding is, again, nowhere to be found in the Fall Economic Statement. With rising costs and long wait lists, struggling Canadians have been left with nowhere to turn but crowded emergency rooms. Today, the Canada Mental Health Association called on the government to stop delaying and deliver their promised mental health transfer. So when will the Liberals finally follow through on their promises and deliver the help that Canadians desperately need?
Honourable Minister for Mental Health.
Our government is engaging now with the provinces and territories to inform and the development of a new mental health transfer, comprehensive evidence-based plan, including the timely sharing of health data. We remain fully committed to investing an additional $4.5 billion over 5 years through the new Canada Mental Health Transfer, and this ongoing engagement will ensure transparency and accountability to Canadians. We are still investing the $5 billion from the bilateral agreements, $600 million for mental health to provinces and territories every year.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
As COP27 opened last week, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, "We are on a highway to climate hell with foot on the accelerator." Did the Prime Minister stay away because he knows he's over the speed limit? Did he stay away because he knows we're part of the problem and not part of the solution? There is still time for this government to do the right thing at COP27. Stand up and announce we have read the science. We understand we have to cancel the Trans Mountain Pipeline, reverse the Bay du Nord decision, and build a decarbonized electricity grid from coast to coast to coast.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the honourable member for the question. And the honourable member knows that our Prime Minister has been front and centre on the most ambitious climate plan in our history. We've invested over $100 billion since 2015, $9.1 billion in our emissions reduction plan. Mr. Speaker, it's a granular, detailed, sector-by-sector plan that are going to get us to our 2030 emissions on our way to net zero by 2050. And, Mr. Speaker, it has widespread support, and we have taken that message to COP27. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. For question period, we have 2 unanimous consent requests. We'll start off with the honourable member for North Island Powell River.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe that if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent for the following motion, that given that Canadians, particularly rural Canadians, ethnic groups, and Indigenous peoples, are vulnerable to misinformation campaigns, both foreign and domestic, to undermine our democracy, the federal government must improve its strategy to support these specific groups. The House call on the government to employ a whole-of-society approach to counter disinformation and build society.
I don't believe we have the unanimous consent. I'm starting to. I just want to remind the honourable members that prior to bringing unanimous consent motions to the floor, shop it around and talk to each other, make sure that everything's in place. This way, we can guarantee success. The honourable member for, the parliamentary. Let me start that over. The Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade, Export Promotions, Small Business and Economic Development is rising on
Very much, Mr. Speaker. There have indeed been discussions amongst the parties, and if you seek it, I believe you'll find unanimous consent for the following motion. That A, after taking power in a military coup in August of 1972, General Idi Amin ordered the expulsion of Ugandans of Asian descent to take effect in 90 days. B, that Canada answered the international call to provide safe haven to Ugandan Asians who had suddenly become stateless. C, that in the fall of 1972, the Canadian government and communities across the country mobilized to welcome 8,000 Ugandan Asians, among them people of various backgrounds and faiths, including Ismailis, Hindus, Sikhs, Catholics, Sunni, and Shia, that this initiative was precedent-setting, representing the first time in Canadian history that a massive refugee resettlement of racialized persons from outside of Europe was undertaken, and E, that these refugees who originally came here for safety have also given back to Canada in immeasurable ways and can continue to contribute to this very day. Therefore, this House confirms that on the 50th anniversary of the Ugandan Asian expulsion, the arrival of 8,000 Ugandan Asians in this country has been to the benefit of Canada and our development as a nation.
All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. Agreed. The House has heard the terms of the motion. All those opposed to the motion will please say nay. Carried. We have a point of order. The honourable member for Kingston Frontenac Lanark. I got Lan right. Sorry. Yes, go ahead.
In the reverse order. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know how anybody keeps track of all the writing names, and I'm always impressed. I wanted to say this with regard to just at the last point of order, seeking unanimous consent, the one prior. The last one actually had the consent of the House, and that had been sought beforehand. I think if we have a slight change to the wording formula, Mr. Speaker, if you seek it, I think you will find unanimous consent to the following motion, which has been approved by the leaders, the House leaders of the recognized parties. I think if that formula were used every time, and anybody who starts by asking for unanimous consent without mentioning that statement of fact, we would end this nonsense of people standing up to read a motion for which there is not consent. I would strongly recommend that you consider that, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
I want to thank the honourable member for his input, and I'll just leave it to the honourable members to do the best that they can to get their messages across. The honourable member for North Island, Powell River, is standing on a point of order as well.
I'm rising today on a point of order regarding the official opposition members' shushing of the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development. Mr. Speaker, I would believe you would find the last sitting week and this week that we saw the same thing and we hear the same thing, a loud shushing of a member of this place. So I just wanted to point out three things. The first is we cannot do indirectly what we cannot do directly. Shushing is the same as telling someone to shut up, which we know is utterly unacceptable in this chamber. Secondly, the term is condescending. I don't think it's...
I think we're getting into debate here, but I mean, one moment. I was just going to speak to it afterwards. One moment, please. If maybe I can comment on that, there is an issue during question period. The shushing, depending on which way you're looking at it, I wasn't sure whether they were shushing the minister because they were very quiet. They were very quiet about it, or they were shushing each other, or they're mocking each other. Either way, it's very important that we respect each other. And that's something that I say to all members on all sides. Because we're giving an example to the kids back home who are watching, the adults who are watching. Is this what we want them to learn from us? So that's all I'm asking. So we'll move on to the next one. Thank you. Tabling, we have another point of order. The honourable member for Edmonton, Elmwood, Transcona.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just in respect of a couple of the points of order that have been raised. In the first case, I think when the member for North Island Powell River was presenting a unanimous consent motion, I know sometimes members here present things, they don't end up getting unanimous consent, but I do think it's important that members be able to finish actually making the motion. People are free to disagree, but they don't need to shout me down. I think that it's important to protect the right of members to put things to the House. And if we establish a culture of cutting off members before they've had a chance to put a question to the House, we're doing a serious disservice to the rights of members in this place. And so I would ask people to contemplate that in their own minds, but also, Mr. Speaker, specifically you, who will have the authority and the power to rule on these things, because I'm concerned about a culture there. Also, I think it's important, and I respect what you had to say about decorum in the House, and I thank you for that message, but I also think it's important that when members are raising points of order about anything, but including decorum and events that have happened on the floor of the House, that again, that they be allowed to finish making the point. Because it's preemptive to be ruling on a point that hasn't been fully made. She said she had 3 things that she wanted to say about the behavior that was exhibited in this place. She didn't finish speaking to the first thing that she raised. And so I think it is important that people be able to make their point to you, Mr. Speaker, so that you're aware of all the facts that they think are relevant to a point before you rule, just as I think it's important for members to hear other members out when they have a motion before saying no, because they don't actually even know what they're saying no to.
I'll just answer to that, and then I'll come back. I just want to remind the honourable members that the prerogative of the Speaker is once the Speaker has heard enough that they figure they can rule on it or make a decision, then they can cut it off. And sometimes it does get into debate, and it's more about getting a message across. And on the unanimous consent, we already have ruled on it, where we've asked members to make sure that they've got everything covered before bringing it. We've had it abused in the past, and I'm not saying that the honourable member for North Island, Powell River, was abusing it. I'm just saying that it has been abused in the past, which has ruined it for people who are putting it forward now. So if they want to make a speech, please wait until they have the time during the sessions when we do have speeches, or even during question period. But unanimous consent was used poorly in the past, and it has caused some... one of the worst... no, I won't say anything. I'll bite my tongue. But I just want to remind the honourable members why we don't allow them to go on and on, because sometimes they have been used more as a method to clandestinely get their message across. And that's what we're trying to avoid, and it just eats up time, and we can't get the business of Parliament completed. So that's the reason why. So that's why I encourage everyone to, if they have a unanimous consent motion, please talk amongst yourselves. And every Tuesday, the House leaders come together. I encourage them to talk tomorrow and maybe give some instruction how they would like that handled to the Speaker. I would appreciate the guidance of all the House leaders. Okay, we'll continue. Tabling of documents. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 36, bracket 8A, I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 30 petitions. These returns will be tabled in an electronic format.
Sorry. Introduction of government bills. Déclaration de ministre.
Minister's statement.
Reports from interparliamentary delegations. Présentation de rapport de comité. The honourable member for Willowdale.
I have the honour to present in both official languages the 6th report of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development in relation to the motion adopted on Wednesday,